press record, and then we'll start admitting people, and then we'll, okay, people are all coming in waves now. So hopefully everyone's on cue. Hi, everyone. If you could mute your microphones, please. Thank you. Okay. And obviously, if you see some of these names that look familiar, feel free to say hi. Okay, so I think we're just about ready to jump in. And here, and again, thank you so much tonight, Marc, for doing this with us on the occasion of our 50th anniversary of the Indiana Jewish Historical Society. We want to give you a warm Hoosier welcome, welcoming you back. And I just wanted to, give everyone a little bit of housekeeping really quickly. If you could please put yourself on mute so that we don't have any echoing background noises, we'd really appreciate that. So I just wanted to first ask you, Marc, please tell us a little bit about your grandparents and your parents, where they came from, their backgrounds. We'd really appreciate that background information.
My mom was from Toledo, Ohio. Her mom was from Russia, and her dad was from Romania. And they came over very early in the 1900s, and they owned a laundry in Toledo, Ohio, which was passed down a couple of generations to her brother, and then her brother's son finally went away. And my dad's parents came over from Hungary, and they were here prior to World War II. They started in Gary, Indiana, moved down to Indianapolis and had a liquor store, and then opened up a grocery store called Berkey Supermarket on 920 West Michigan Street in Indianapolis. At one time in the 50s was the largest supermarket in the state of Indiana. And then, of course, the bigger ones, the Krogers and all those other ones came in. So my mom and dad met through relatives, and my dad was in World War II. In fact, interesting thing, my brother and I and our wives, right before COVID, went to Normandy and found a guy who followed my dad's footsteps through World War II. It took him a year to do the research, and we, all those guys didn't talk about much of what went on during the war, and we learned quite a bit. So that was fascinating. And my dad worked at Berkey Supermarket until Indiana University came in and the eminent domain thing, and gave them no money and tore the place down. My dad went from job to job and eventually was working for a company called Affiliated Agencies, which was the largest independent insurance company in the state of Indiana. He became vice president of that and did that until he retired. They're both gone now. My brother lives in upstate New York. He is a musician, was a prodigy of sorts, was playing for Henry Mancini and Johnny Mathis when he was 16 years old. They used to pull a car up, put his drums in the back of a station wagon and drive him to Chicago back in the day. And my sister lives in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And that's a little bit about the family.
Wow. So we have Gary, Indiana, Fort Wayne represented. And there's so many stories about families owning grocery stores. Did you know any other Jewish families that owned grocery stores growing up?
My friend Greg DeFusi had a grocery store smaller than ours around the corner from the area we were in. It was primarily a black area, and we serviced those areas quite nicely back in the days, back when the Jews and the blacks all got along. That's for some reason changed, but that's a whole other story. And the area was rather depressed, and then IUPUI came in and put in a bazillion hospitals. And there's a thing called the Walker Theater. Lily Bundles, who I went to high school with, her great-great-grandmother was a lady by the name of Madam Walker, who was the first Black millionaire in the country doing hair products. And that whole area has been, just energized. And it's such a nice area with restaurants and, clothing stores. And it's become a total different area than what I grew up in back in the 50s and 60s.
So if you could tell us a little bit about growing up at IHC, what was IHC like when you were young, when you were a little kid?
Well, my dad's dad was, so the story goes, was going to become a rabbi. So during the high holidays and doing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and certainly Passover, it went on for freaking hours. We got there, 7 o'clock at night. I think at 11 o'clock we were maybe done. So that was, nuts. And I guess we all sort of went through that. My parents originally belonged to Bethel Temple. And because my father, shall we say, was thrifty, I think back when they started to charge for high holiday services, believe it or not, at one point, those were all free. And my dad, and I actually agree with him, didn't believe in paying to pray. So IHC, Indianapolis Hebrew Congregation, still had free services, not anymore. And we went from being conservative to Reform Jews when I was in about, I don't know, first grade or something. And they put me up a year ahead in the nursery school and grade school thing. I used to go to Sunday school and ended up going to the confirmation class with people who were a year ahead of me. So when I was in high school, all my friends who were sophomores, the people in the confirmation class were juniors. So I kind of had an interesting balance of friends my age and then a year up from there. And I went to Sunday school, went to confirmation class. Rabbi Davis, who was probably a huge influence on my life in the Jewish community, was quite an amazing person in so many different ways. Took us to New York to teach us our Jewish roots and our heritage. First time I saw a Broadway show, it was Fiddler on the Roof. It was 1964, I think April. And I think like many people after that, just kind of went to the high holidays and then pretty much stopped going to much of anything other than those services. Occasionally Friday night, and if there was a bar bat mitzvah, friends and families. But it seems like the older you get, the less you go.
So growing up, were you aware of Rabbi Davis's involvement in the civil rights movement, or was that something that you didn't really discuss as a kid? Or
Oh, no, big time. I was so impressed. He was, I tell you the kind of guy he was. In our confirmation class, in our first day, he said, we're going to have a gigantic exam in the spring. And everything that I'm going to teach you, and Rabbi Weitzman is going to teach you from now until that point, will culminate with this massive exam in order for you to be confirmed from our synagogue. And so we took this very serious, and he was who he was, civil rights guy, and was a pillar in the community and very bright guy and Mr. Personality. I loved him and was very influential in my life. We went to these intense classes, and then we went to New York for the confirmation class. And in that May, when we were getting ready to do the confirmation class exam, which we were all nervous wrecks about, he said, okay, the test is next week. I hope you're all ready for it. We came in the next week. He says, so does everybody know all the information and feel confident about the test? And our class said yes. And he said, well, I guess I don't need to give you the test. You're all confirmed and dismissed and have a nice life. And so to this day, I'm going to be 71 years old in a few weeks. It had a lasting impression on me. And the other thing was Rabbi Weitzman, who was the assistant rabbi, I was close to as well. And I guess because his background before being a rabbi was he majored in radio and television. And so I was going through a dilemma of sorts. After my bar mitzvah, I was really sort of influenced, and I liked the feeling. And I thought, well, maybe I'll become a rabbi. But then I was continuing performing in Indianapolis and doing magic and doing a kids' TV show called Popeye and Janie on Channel 4, the independent station. And I couldn't decide what I wanted to do. Did I want to be a rabbi or did I want to be a performer? And one day I was about 14 years old. I rode my bike over to the synagogue, knocked on Rabbi Weitzman's door and said, can I talk to you? And he said, come in and sit down. He said, what do you want to discuss? And I said, I'm kind of confused and maybe you'll understand this. I really enjoyed my bar mitzvah and felt pretty cool about being on that pulpit, but I also love to perform. And I can't decide if I want to be an entertainer or be a rabbi. And he said, well, I went to school and studied radio and TV, and eventually got ordained as a rabbi. And he said, as a rabbi, you can help a small amount of people a lot, but as a performer, you can help a lot of people a little. So I don't think you can go wrong either way. And I always kept that in my mind, and I chose to take the help a lot of people a little, become a performer as opposed to becoming a rabbi. And it was through his help that kind of steered me in that direction.
One of the things that you talked about in your later television days was about your love of Shapiro's peppered beef. But what are some other favorite Jewish foods that you gained from your family, from your grandparents and your parents?
Well, my mother was the worst cook in the history of the world. I was the only kid who went to college and thought the dorm food was better than my mom's food. Her mother was an amazing cook. And when I used to spend the summers in Toledo, Ohio, Bubba, as we called her, there would be food and flour and everything flying in the kitchen. One day was an all baking day with pastries. She made amazing cookies and challah and you name it, she made it. But she also made the best chicken soup. And the secret was the feet, she told me. And my dad's parents cooked not quite as good as Bubba. So my dad was Bubby and Zadie, and my mom, it was Bubba and Zeta. But I think Bubba had much better culinary techniques. We would go on weekends to either Fox's Delicatessen, which was primarily in the Broad Ripple area. And there was a place called Sam's Subway, which was owned by the Hochman family. And the Hochman family, Jan, I went to school with, and we were dear, dear friends. First time I ever had cheesecake. And their food was amazing. And they had a location in the Glendale Shopping Center. And they had a thing sort of like Midtown by the Murat Hotel. All of a sudden it disappeared. I mean, this place was so successful and so busy, and then it disappeared. I went to Shapiro's a few weeks ago. I was in Indianapolis for my high school reunion. Sadly, I think that the quality of the food is sort of dipped, not quite what it was. The rye bread wasn't the same. The pepper beef had no pepper in it. And so the first two things I would do when I would get to Indianapolis, whenever I would go back, would be first go to Shapiro's and second to go Steak and Shake. And they both kind of have lost their luster. So there's kind of almost no reason to go back to Indianapolis. All the relatives are gone. And the food I craved, the Lotus Garden was the other place on Sundays. Every Jew in Indianapolis would go to a Chinese restaurant called the Lotus Garden. You could hold services there. There were so many people. And that was sort of a traditional thing. But beyond that, can't think of anything.
So, your other culinary Jewish encounters, I'm sure you've probably been the Langers and Katz. I mean, would you say that unfortunately there's sort of been a steady decline in all those? They're just not the same as they used to be. It's hard to come with the same results, I guess, on a mass quantity.
Well, you know what? I'll disagree on the New York side. Certainly, Katz's Delicatessen to me is exactly the same. It's pretty remarkable. Haven't been to Langer's in a while, but the last time I was there, it was pretty remarkable. We do have a really good deli here called Brent's, which has a location in Northridge and one in Westlake, California. And that's kind of our go-to New Year's Eve, get the corned beef and coleslaw and, arugula and all that stuff. But with the health thing and people not eating that kind of food anymore, the amount of delis, I think nationwide, is sort of disappeared, sadly, because that's a distinct flavor, distinct food that was synonymous with Jewish people. And hope it sticks around, but it's anybody's guess. Since COVID, everything has changed so dramatically, so it's hard to tell.
What was it like, kind of encountering, being a small minority in Indianapolis, being Jewish, and encountering non-Jews? Did you ever encounter any anti-Semitism at all growing up?
No question about it. Two things stand out in my mind. I was in third grade, and this kid named John, I won't give his last name, although I know he's not around anymore, but he took me by my collar and threw me against the wall, and he said, "You're a dirty kike." And I had never heard that before. And I remember I went home that night and asked my parents what a dirty kike was, and they told me it was a derogatory term for Jews. And, that's something that's learned from a family member. So obviously his mom or his dad used that term, and he caught on and, zeroed in on me in third grade. And the other one was I was working for a company. I was looking for a job, trying to make money when I was in high school. And I worked for an arts and crafts store. Originally, I worked at a place called Jubilee City. And then got a better job at this arts and crafts store. And it was near where the Lotus Garden used to be, and it was on a corner there in that shopping center. And he asked me to put a display stand together. He was going to go to lunch, and could it be put together by the time he got back? I am not mechanically inclined at all. And I was 16 years old. He came back, and I put the whole thing together backwards or upside down or something, and it wasn't right. And his comment to me was, I never knew a Jew who was mechanically inclined. And I said, yeah, go F yourself, and walked out the door. You know, that stuff was around then. It's around now. And when you got guys like Kanye West who say the things they do, and over the weekend there was a banner over the 405 freeway here in Los Angeles saying Kanye was right. I just don't think, you know, and heard on the news today that 50% of people in America have never heard of the Holocaust. So is it going to stick around? Yeah, probably.
So, you know, taking all these different lessons, you mentioned earlier, Rabbi Davis, how he was an influence in your life. Were there different life lessons that you took from Indianapolis that you applied to the rest of your career that you would feel?
Well, I think growing up in the Midwest is an additive to anybody's life. My parents were ones who made us work. I mean, I had a paper route when I was 11 years old. I worked at my dad's supermarket and made a whopping $5 a day if I went and, you know, bagged groceries or worked the cash register or worked back in the produce section or things such as that. So when it came to buying school clothes in the fall, we could buy them, but we had to pay for half of them. And so I think they taught us, whether it's a Midwest thing or a Jewish thing or a combination of the thing, you know, how to sort of prepare for our future lives, how to look after ourselves, how to get involved in the business world. And all those elements were quite helpful when I first left in 1971 to go to college in Boston. And then in 1973, when I moved to Los Angeles, I think all those lessons and those upbringing experiences helped build me to the person I am today. And I think it's part of the reason I'm successful.
And I think you mentioned one of your Jewish role models early on, and they don't have to necessarily be from Indianapolis or from Indiana even, but what are some Jewish role models that you had growing up?
Well, this is going to sound hysterical. My mom lived in Toledo, and I would go up there often, and there was a man by the name of Soupy Sales who would have a show on in the morning having breakfast with Soupy, and then it was lunch with Soupy, and then he did a syndicated show. I started at the Comedy Store as a regular in 1976. And while I was there, Soupy was not doing as much TV, but he was doing a stand-up comedy act. And there was a book that I had that I bought when I was a kid, 10, 11 years old. And I had it and I brought it to the backstage dressing room area and had Soupy sign it. And we exchanged phone numbers and we became best friends at that point. Dear friends, to the point where I was supposed to speak at his funeral, but got stuck on a train in Philadelphia and sadly missed it. But we hung out together. He used to take me to lunch at the Friars Club on a regular basis, and we helped each other a lot. He couldn't have been kinder. Every TV show I ever had, whether it was a talk show, a game show, whatever, I always had Soupy on it because he was a huge influence on me. Milton Sutton was his real name, and his parents, he grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia, and his parents had a dry goods store, and they had a deal with the Ku Klux Klan that if they would sell them the sheets, they would leave their family alone. So Soupy was a gigantic influence. And I was influenced by TV back in the day. Certainly the Ed Sullivan Show, the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Most comedians were Jewish. Alan King had a big influence on me, certainly Henny Youngman. And so I was drawn to that. I didn't know quite how I was going to make a living doing that, but it's what my dream was. And I started off doing magic and did a show called Popeye and Janie doing magic on that. And we had an international magic convention in 1967 in Indianapolis. And we were walking to one of the big shows at the Murat Theater. And a guy stopped and he said, I want to learn magic. And I said, well, that's interesting. What do you do for a living? He said, I'm a disc jockey. And I said, well, if you get me on the radio, I'll teach you magic. And he did. He was working late nights on WIRE, midnight to 5 in the morning, but he was also doing a weekend gig at the WBMP in Elwood, Indiana. And I started doing weekends from 6 to 11. He did the technical stuff on the boards and did all the readings of the monitors. And I was Mark Vaughn, because the guy who owned the station supposedly didn't like Jews, and I wasn't allowed to be Mark Berkowitz. So I became Mark Vaughn. Why I got that name, I have no idea. And did weekends for a while. And so I didn't have a lot of influences in Indianapolis from the Jewish side. It was more about I was focused, and I had a passion early on about being in the entertainment world. And it just so seemed that so many of the people on that side were Jewish. My Uncle Fred, my mom's brother in Toledo, was best friends with Danny Thomas. And so, although everybody thinks Danny Thomas was Jewish, he wasn't. Amos Jacobs was his real name. And, he was not Jewish, but was very big around the Jewish community and used to play basketball at the Jewish Community Center in Toledo. And my Uncle Fred Weisberg, where he and Danny were best friends. And so through that, I got to meet Danny when I was a page at CBS Television City, walked up to him and said, my uncle's Fred Weisberg. And he was very kind and took me under his arm. And then ended up working for his son, Tony Thomas, Danny's son, on a show called Soap and a few other things. So Jewish geography and various connections led from early career things that led me to where I eventually got.
Interesting. Would you say during the course of your career, some specific special Jewish memories of holidays that you had over the years, interesting occasions, vignettes about Jewish holidays? It doesn't have to necessarily have taken place in Indianapolis, though.
No, I never liked going to Passover at my grandparents' house. We went to high holiday services at IHC. I guess you don't really realize how Jewish you are at times until I was at Boston when the massacre at the Olympics happened. And for some reason, the first thing I did was run to the Hillel House at Boston University's campus. Now, it was locked and I couldn't get in. So I sat on the walkway and just was in disbelief. I'm 18 years old that this actually happened. And a couple of people came by and saw me there and said, what's going on? And I said, did you hear what happened at the Olympics? And sat and talked to some of those folks. So, other than that, I really, did I go to, all the services and all the, Purim carnivals and all that stuff? Yeah, I did for a while. But nothing, Rabbi Davis was the reason I was attracted to our synagogue. And when he left, I don't remember the name of the rabbi who took his place. I found it not as interesting.
Yeah. Did your parents try to get you to join Jewish clubs? Any stories about that? Jewish dating?
Yeah, I dated two Jewish girls in my life. Both were Greek Jews. I married one. The other one I didn't. I never dated a lot of Jewish girls. Did my parents try to get me involved with clubs? Yeah, I suppose so. And, other than going to the Jewish Community Center and swimming during the summer or going to play basketball, I didn't have this, embedded Jewish community thing going on in my life at the time. I was too busy trying to figure out how I was going to get the show business to worry about those other things.
Were other peers also thinking about how they can get into show business like yourself, or looking back?
No, I met a guy, Chet Cubitt, who was the shop teacher at Wesleyan Junior High, and he had a magic club. And I thought, oh my God, because I didn't know how to get on stage and perform. They weren't hiring a lot of 11-year-old stand-up comics. And I found out I had this passion for Johnny Carson. He was doing a show called Who Do You Trust? And then The Tonight Show. And I found out he got his start as a magician. And I figured out, well, if Johnny can do that, then I can do that. And so that's my first leap. And then slowly but surely found out through working clubs early on in the 70s in Los Angeles that magicians were considered novelty acts. And you got paid less money. I was an opening act for Gallagher. And he was the one who told me that I was making less money as a magician than I was as a stand-up comic. And so I started doing more stand-up and less magic. And so, no, that was my focus. That was my passion. And I really didn't know anybody else. I was performing in a thing called Footlight Musicals. I did Bye Bye Birdie and a bunch of other things. So anything I could do to get on stage in Indianapolis is what my goal was, and started doing it from the time I guess I was about 11 years old on. And I had amazing chutzpah. There was a guy who did a thing called the Dante Magic Set. He was basically an insurance salesman in Rochester, New York. And he went on all the kid shows in Indianapolis. And I somehow got his home phone number because there were no computers and Nexus Lexus, called him at home and said, hey, I'm going to be the spokesperson for the Dante Magic Set. And he said, kid, you can do whatever you want, but I'm not going to pay you. So I started calling TV stations in Indianapolis saying, hi, I'm the national spokesperson of the Dante Magic Set. Can I come on your show and demonstrate it? And they said, sure. So the guy in Rochester sent me a bunch of these cases, and I came on and started doing basically free commercials, but it got me on television. And, between the magic stuff on TV and the disc jockey thing on the weekends, I felt I was in show business. There was one place downtown at the Indiana Theater. There was a huge newsstand. And it was the only place in Indianapolis where you could get Variety magazine, which is the Bible of show business. And every Saturday, I would take the bus to downtown Indianapolis, get Variety, read it from cover to cover twice, and wait till the next Saturday when it can go down. And I would read about auditions. And I remember once they were having auditions for Cedar Point for the summer, where you could, sing, dance, or juggle. And I went and did my magic act. Didn't make it. I guess I wasn't good enough for them. But that's what my focus was.
So it was just drive, determination, making the different connections. And I mean, were your parents also encouraging you in this direction, or were they not so?
Not at all.
They weren't.
They thought I was out of my mind. First, I said I wanted to be a professional magician, and my mother said that's a hobby. That's no way to make a living. And my dad thought I was going to go in the insurance business with him. Oh, you've got a great personality, you'll do that. And I couldn't think of anything closer to hell than doing a 9-to-5 job at an office. So I had no desire to do that. And my parents, quite honestly, were not supportive much at all. They just thought it was a joke and that I needed to get a real job.
It's interesting, how many different Jewish entertainers from like a previous generation to then coming to America, and then the reality sitting in to their children then wanting to become entertainers. It must have been shocking to them, because people became entertainers sometimes because they didn't have other choices. So if you have all these choices, like their child becoming a doctor or an engineer, and then suddenly they want to be an entertainer, do you think that's part of the shock of it to them?
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, there was no, the whole thing was security and, how you got to make a living and security. My dad had a supermarket that his father owned. IUPUI comes in, doesn't give enough money. My grandfather takes all the money, doesn't give anything to my dad after basically running the place for years. And so my dad was out on his own. And, at one point we thought we were going to have to sell our house and things such as that. So I think they wanted what was best for me, but I just had no interest in doing anything like that. And I was willing to roll the dice. And when I went to school in Boston, it was kind of a mistake. I had joined the Navy after my senior year in high school, thinking I was going to go to Armed Forces Radio and Television. Well, when I got in, I found out I was going to Vietnam, and met a fantastic doctor who was able to get me out because I had a history of bad knees. And he wrote a letter, and I was in and out of the Navy in Great Lakes, Illinois in 28 days. And then my dad got me a job working in commercial loans at American Fletcher National Bank in downtown Indianapolis. And it was as bad as I thought, and then some. I was getting chest pains at age 18, went down to the nurse one day and found out my blood pressure was like, 200 over 180. And the nurse said, if you keep this up, you're going to die. And so I went to every TV station in Indianapolis and tried to get a job, and I had no experience. And they said, see ya. And my mom cut out an article from 17 magazine that my sister used to read, and it said, come to Boston and learn broadcasting, Graham Junior College. And I went and got into school, and it was like dying and going to heaven. Friends I have today, 50 plus years later, are still my friends. Bert Dubrow, who created Sally Jesse Raphael and Jerry Springer, I met at Graham Junior College. Paul Fusco created Alf. I met at Graham Junior College. I went to school with Andy Kaufman, the comedian. And so I was in a room of misfits who all just wanted to do entertainment 24/7. We had 2 color studios, a radio station, and I had died and gone to heaven. So I did that for 2 years. And then my brother was playing drums for Helen Reddy in Los Angeles. I moved in with him for a while, got a job at CBS Television City as a page, working on All in the Family and Sonny and Cher and Carol Burnett and things like that. And, through my persistence and aggressiveness, one thing led to another. Now, I was out here for 13 years before I landed Double Dare. I was 34 years old. And I thought, well, how much longer is this going to take me? And I was married, had a couple of kids and a house. And I was doing warm-ups on TV shows, but on the side, believe it or not, I had a smoked salmon business through a mutual friend in Cape Town, South Africa. So I was selling smoked salmon on the side, and I got us into the Price Club. Which became Costco. We were doing 80,000 pounds a month of smoked salmon, and then I got us into Trader Joe's, and I was making a lot of money, but was depressed. And a friend of mine from Indianapolis, Dave Garrison, who was a ventriloquist, got a call to audition for a show that he didn't know what it was about with a network called Nickelodeon that he'd never heard of. And he called me up and said, I don't want to be talent anymore. I want to be a producer and be behind the scenes. Why don't you go to this audition instead of me? They had already auditioned 100 people in New York, 1,000 people. I'm sorry, 1,000 people in New York, didn't like any of them. Came to LA. I was the first guy to audition. They auditioned a total of 1,000 people in New York and LA, so 2,000. And I got the job. And that was in 1986. And after putting in my time and 13 years in Southern California, it changed my life. And since 86, I've worked consistently in the entertainment industry, both as a host and as a producer. And as I always say, I've never worked a day in my life. It's been the most fun I could ever have.
So stepping back that you said that you knew a young Andy Kaufman, are the portrayals by Jim Carrey accurate of him or not accurate at all from what you knew about Andy Kaufman?
No, Andy was nuts. And by the way, I didn't ever think he was particularly funny. He was nuts. I would walk in the Improv some nights and you go, "Hey, Mark, how are you? Want to have dinner?" And we'd sit and have dinner. And then I'd come in 2 nights later and I'd say, "Hey, Andy, how are you?" And he'd go, have we met? Do I know you? And I used to say, "Hey, Andy, I'm going to pull that crap with other people. Go ahead, but I have no interest." And I kind of think his career was over. Just my opinion. There's one book out where I'm probably the only person who trashes Andy. I didn't get his act. I didn't think it was funny. Not my cup of tea. Some people loved him. But I think he had sort of burned every bridge. And after he got done doing the wrestling stuff, and I think he was desperate. And I'm not sure that his career would have gone on much more when they did that vote on Saturday Night Live about having him banned. And it was just too extreme for me. Getting people in a nightclub and reading them The Great Gatsby and watching them walk out was not my idea of a good time, or putting people on a school bus and taking them for milk or cookies. Okay, that's a one-time thing, not what I found humorous. So, David Letterman to me is hysterical, and there's a guy from Indiana. Andy, I never got it.
And that's interesting. I never would have put you together with Andy Kaufman. So that's one connection I didn't expect tonight.
Well, when I started in 76 and became a regular at the store, I started with Dave and Robin Williams and Jay Leno and Gary Shandling. These were all my friends and my peers. These are the guys I started my career with.
And what were the kind of humorists that your parents liked to listen to? Were they Marx Brothers fans, Three Stooges fans? What kind of comedy did they like?
They loved Alan King. They thought Alan King was the funniest person in the world. And by the way, go online and Google "Survived by His Wife." It's a routine that Alan King did that to this day still holds up and is absolutely hysterical. And any comedian on the Ed Sullivan Show they thought was great. They loved, Henny Youngman in particular. It's funny though, on Sirius Satellite Radio, they have a thing called Comedy Greats, and they'll take bits from the old Ed Sullivan Show and put it on. And a lot of it doesn't hold up, Jack Carter seemed to do kind of the same routine week after week after week. My parents, I remember, laughed at him at the time, but his sense of humor did not hold up. And we didn't watch a lot of movies, and I didn't get into the Marx Brothers until I was in college. I kind of didn't know who they were, and then grew as great friends. Through not knowing them. I met Groucho once or twice, but there was nobody that stood out in my mind other than Alan King. They thought my dad kind of looked like Alan King, and there was just nobody funnier in their mind.
What comedians would you say aged like fine wine, and which ones would you say their routines? We already mentioned Andy Kaufman, but which ones do you think wouldn't play so well from your youth?
Well, I loved Myron Cohen. And by the way, I loved Danny Thomas, but they told stories. They would get up there and tell 2 stories in 42 minutes. And, Henny was, boom, 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 joke, 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 joke. Rodney was amazing. Rodney got better with age. Rodney Dangerfield, nobody was funnier than him. Alan Sherman certainly broke through new ground. He was the Weird Al of our youth. And I am sure Weird Al looked at Alan Sherman and thought, oh my God, I wanted to do that. But there aren't a lot of people. I mean, the sense of, the David Brenners of the world happened, and Leno happened, and Dave happened, and Shandling happened. And those people, I think, Letterman, even today, he's 4 years older than me, so Dave's going to be 75. Still holds up, in my opinion. Now, there are a lot of people who don't like Dave's sense of humor. They find him too mean, too angry. I don't. I just find him intellectually brilliant. But to each his own. That's why there's so many different kinds of comics. But it's interesting who ages well and who doesn't. A lot of them don't.
So I think we're about at 8:30 right now. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us that we didn't touch on that you think people would find interesting or don't know about your time growing up in Indianapolis?
I can't think of anything. I did magic shows to make a living. I remember I would do birthday parties for $25 for a half hour. And some Saturdays I do 3, and Sundays I do 3. So, I could make $150 on a weekend when I was 14, 15, 16 years old. I remember once there was a company down in Southern Indiana, I don't remember where they were, called the Regal Rug Company. And they called me to do their holiday party. And they wanted an hour. Well, I didn't have an hour of material. There's a guy by the name of Bob Warren who did a clown thing. He was a director at Channel 8, the CBS station. His wife, Shirley Warren, was my 6th grade teacher. And Bob and I used to talk all the time, and I got called to do this hour of material. And I was on the phone with them, and they said, how much would an hour of material cost us? And I, for some reason, said $250. And I hung up. My mother got so upset. She said, you call those people back and tell them that, you're not going to charge them $250. I said, they said yes. So I think 15, couldn't drive. I called Bob Warren, and he got in the car and drove us down there. And I gave him 125, and I did 125 for doing, an hour's worth of entertainment for the Regal Rug Company. And so, I always figured a way to make money by doing entertainment, even back early in the day. And I was aggressive, I was crazy, but it paid off. And that foundation of Indianapolis, what I miss about Indianapolis in those times are, we lived at 75th and Spring Mill Road, 415 Spring Mill Road, Spring Mill Lane rather. And, I could ride my bike from there to Broad Ripple, to the Glendale Shopping Center and home. And the parents would never worry, is he coming home or not? I don't think you could do that today. Up the street on 77th Street, I had a bundle of friends I'm still friends with Tom Swinson, Dave Porter. There was a 4th of July event every year, and we went there and played baseball and had fun. And just the whole upbringing of the Midwest was pretty special. And the Jewish aspect was a part of my life, but not a gigantic part of my life. And yet I think had probably a pretty tremendous influence overall if I step back and look at the big picture.
Which that gives me an interesting follow-up question. After living on the East Coast and the West Coast and probably being in the South quite a bit, would you say there's a particular Midwestern Jewish culture?
Yeah. I mean, I remember doing a Double Dare show in Nashville and got approached by these people in this beautiful shopping center who were all Hasidic Jews, constantly asking me for money for their funds and things. But until I heard somebody say the Shema with a Southern accent, you haven't lived. And so, yes, there's a conservative aspect of the Midwest, and I think of Southern Jews. But the New York Jewish community, I think, is entirely different. A lot more aggressive, a lot more fun in many ways. And there's an attitude amongst Jews, because I lived in Boston, lived in New York, lived in Philadelphia. And there's definitely a different feel. But the bottom line is, being a Jew, there's a community. I forget who it was who said, the difference between dating a non-Jewish girl and a Jewish girl is if you date a Jewish girl, you can talk about chicken soup. And that says a lot right there, I think.
Were people surprised that you were from Indiana, from Indianapolis, when you were in Boston?
Yeah, they did. The one thing that I was super focused on is the accent in Indianapolis, wash the clothes, and the way they'd say certain words. And I always hated that. And so early on, especially when I was doing radio at age 15, I wanted to make sure that I had no colloquialisms or any regional accent. And so people always say to me, where are you from? You don't have an accent. And I focused on that. And when I hear certain relatives and friends back there, it's interesting to me how that Indiana drawl sort of maintains. And I was very much aware of that and didn't want any part of that.
It's even fascinating. I think in the city, there's even like different dialects between the northern part of the city and the southern part of the city from people who grew up in different neighborhoods.
Yep, I would agree. And keep in mind, when I started in Indianapolis as a kid, we used to go to Shapiro's, and right next to Shapiro's was a place where I used to get my haircut like every 3 weeks. And the Jewish community was on the south side, and then slowly migrated to the north side of Indianapolis, and now it's like way the heck up there. So yeah, people change where they live and change their jobs, and it's just part of what makes the world go round.
Was Regan's Rye still there right next to Shapiro's? Is that the rye bread that you're missing?
Yeah, Regan's Rye was fantastic. I remember that stuff. Yeah, it was great.
That's what everyone asks. Whatever happened to that? I think that might be one of our number one questions. But there's a lot of cool pictures that I still have from the neighborhood, and a few different historians have looked at that neighborhood, which is really, it's sad because it's a whole lost world of different Jewish restaurants, kosher butchers, kosher bakers, and that existed that people don't know about anymore. And Shapiro's is basically like the last remnant of it.
It's true. And my grandfather at Berkey Supermarket was a butcher, and my dad was a butcher. I mean, that's how they started their lives. They were butchers. First, they had a liquor store, and then they were butchers, and then they opened up, a grocery store. So I think that was sort of traditional back in the day, where now a lot of people from the Middle East are running 7-Elevens. At one point, there were Jewish guys who were butchers and had liquor stores and grocery stores. And, as time went on and their kids went to college and became doctors and lawyers, whatever, it kind of got rid of the prior generation's, upbringing.
So I think we're going to take a few different questions here. If anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourself, or I can help you unmute if you have any questions here for Marc. Do I have any questions in the chat here? Don't be shy.
Right.
If anybody has any questions, I can help you unmute if you're having trouble unmuting. Okay, I'm not. Would anybody like to unmute? Oh, Dan, you can raise your hand here.
Marc, you had a book about obsessive compulsive behavior. Do you care to mention something about that?
Well, it's called Everything in Its Place, and I wrote it in 1999. I was hosting a talk show on Lifetime called Biggers and Summers, and one of our guests was Dr. Eric Hollander. And the night before, I was reading the material and realized that all the things I was about to talk about on live TV the next day, I had, and found out, through hereditary, that, when my grandmother in Toledo used to sweep the streets, and I used to have to help her wash windows and, do all sorts of stuff, which then lent down to my mother. And, part of my upbringing was cleaning. And we cleaned all the time, and I was on my hands and knees doing the woodwork or whatever. And so to finally get properly diagnosed and find out about intrusive thoughts and all the cleaning helped me tremendously. I went to behavior therapy class. I was on medication for a while. Dr. Hollander really helped me a lot. And next thing I knew, I was in People magazine. I was on Oprah. I was on Howard Stern discussing this. And my parents were embarrassed by it. They didn't talk to me for almost a year after I went on Oprah and People magazine and said that my parents did this stuff. We used to have a cleaning lady come a couple times a month. And if she touched my dad's closet and something was moved, a millimeter, my dad would, go out of his freaking mind. And so I grew up around that. And, even if I would have come to somebody in my teens, there was nothing anybody could have done. It wasn't until the late 1998, 99, that they had behavior therapy and medication and things like that. It is OCD is predominant amongst Ashkenazi Jews, believe it or not. But the best thing that's happened in my entire career is I wrote a book and then did all these shows, and people come up to me now on a weekly basis and say, I didn't know what I had until I saw you on Oprah, or until I read your book, and you changed my life. So all the other stuff I did, whether it's the Nickelodeon stuff or Food Network stuff or whatever shows I produced or hosted, when people come up to you and say you changed my life for the better because I saw that segment you did on TV or read your book, that's probably the most important thing I ever did in my career and my entire life.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
Thank you, Stephen. Do we have any other questions here? Kathy Winnick.
Hi, I'm up here in Grand Rapids, and it's been fascinating listening to you. What's next for you professionally? What's in the works?
What, I'm trying to retire. I'm 71 years old. I've kind of done everything I wanted to do, and I can't think of much else. I fill in every now and then. There's a show called Daily Blast Live that a friend of mine produces in Denver. So I was in Denver last Wednesday and Thursday guest hosting on that. I'm working on a few things, but I moved up to the Central Coast of California. I take a 5-mile walk every day. I took a nice trip to Italy this summer. We're planning someplace to go for next summer. So I'm not motivated to do a whole bunch. I have 2 grandkids. I like spending time with them. One is a sports nut, and he plays soccer and he plays baseball, and I love going to his games. My younger one is at 2.5, an intellectual, and he's going to be working for NASA or something at some point. So I've kind of moved on in my life. Had some health issues over the last couple of years. I've been diagnosed with something called chronic lymphatic leukemia 12 years ago. And first with chemo, and now I'm on a pill that costs way too much money, and that's keeping me alive. And so when you get to this point of your life, you say, nothing else really matters. I've kind of done what I've wanted to do, and who cares? And I want to spend it with my family and my wife. We've been married 48 years. I've only been home 14 of them, but that's why it works. I'm just having fun.
Okay, good for you.
Thanks. Thank you for asking.
Okay, so do we have any other questions? I think we have time for maybe one more question if someone else would like to ask. And if not, then I'll hand it back to Marc and thank Marc. We should all thank Marc for coming on today, sharing his family's history and sharing his own history in Indiana. So we really appreciate that. Being here with us today and sharing so many memories with us. So we really appreciate it. And we should all give you a round of applause.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for asking me. I hope it was informative and somewhat entertaining. And I want to wish you all health and happiness. And hopefully we'll all get to meet in person someday soon. Thanks for asking me.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best. And thank you everyone for coming tonight. Appreciate it. All the best, everyone. Bye-bye. Good night.